Hi guys, so I wanted to record a quick lecture on understanding the impact of our orthotic interventions. I'm gonna add some videos at the end of this lecture, a little bit later once I record them, but I wanted to go ahead and get this lecture out to you guys. So, our objectives are going to be to understand how orthotics are utilized to normalize gait deviations, analyze the positive and the negative effects of fixing the ankle on our rocker system and our ground reaction force vector at our knee joints. That's going to be as far as I really want you to go. How does adding in orthotic change our rocker system, and how does it change the ground reaction force vector at the knee joint relative to normal gait? And then we are going to theorize some modifications to mitigate some of the undesired effects that come with our bracing interventions on the gait cycle. So let's go ahead and jump in. So what we're going to use as our case study is a solid ankle AFO with the ankle angle set at neutral dorsiflexion. So this is always going to be our kind of comparison to normal gait. And so we're going to talk about what does fixing the ankle at neutral do to our rocker systems and to our ground reaction force vector at our knee joint. All right, so when we've decided to give them this orthotic, we did it for a reason. It could have been the best orthotic for accomplishing our orthotic goals. Maybe we wanted to optimize their heel contact at our initial contact. That helps them improve their forward progression. Maybe we wanted to improve sagittal plane stability of the knee during single limb stance, as we might have seen during our gait analysis that they were demonstrating signs of instability at the knee during the single limb stance phase of gait. And we thought a solid ankle AFO was the most appropriate thing for them. And we could have seen that they had frontal plane ankle instability during single limb stance, and we want to capture their malleoli with our trim lines to improve stability at their foot and ankle complex. So where are we getting all of these orthotic goals? So that is from your soft chalk. When we see our three functional tasks of gait here. So when we are prescribing an orthotic, we're always trying to optimize some kind of subtask or some goal within the functional tasks of gait. And so I talked about trying to optimize heel contact at initial contact. Why do we do that? We are trying to improve forward progression. If we have a nice landing of our heel, then that is going to facilitate a nice rollover, and we're going to have good forward progression there. All right, so same thing with improving our sagittal plane stability of the knee during single limb stance. We are trying to optimize stability as a goal within the functional task of single limb support of gait. All right. When we do some of these things, we accomplish these goals by manipulating where is the ankle resting. So what are the kinematics of our ankle? So we've decided to put them in neutral. All right, it makes sense. So neutral ankle is going to optimize our heel contact. All right. But then manipulating that ankle angle is also going to affect our ground reaction force vectors at our knee. So that can be positive. That can have the effect of improving our sagittal plane stability at our knee because of what that ends up doing to the ground reaction force vector at the knee. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But there can also be negative effects, because when we fix our ankle, obviously, that is not normal. That's not creating kinematically normal gait. And so we want to be seeing what is the effect of fixing that ankle, and now how does that look relative to normal gait. We want to see what effect does fixing that ankle have on our ground reaction force vector at the knee, and I didn't include it in the bullet point here, but also on our rocker system throughout our gait cycle. And how does that end up manifesting during the gait cycle? Now, are we seeing new kinds of gait deviations? Is our gait as efficient as we want it to be? Are we seeing that the person is preserving their forward momentum and smoothly rolling through the gait cycle? Or are we not seeing that? Are we still seeing some kind of ill effects? Are we seeing, like I said, new gait deviations? Are we seeing a decrease in their energy efficiency? And if we are seeing these things, what kinds of things can we do to end up addressing that? So before we get into the details, I'm going to give you guys just kind of the big picture look at the whole puzzle. The kind of general rules for orthotic prescription. And if you guys just memorize these things, then you'll likely get by on most multiple choice tests. You'll likely be able to speak with your CI about orthotic prescription, and even in the clinic, you'll likely have many successful orthotic prescriptions. But if you understand and are really able to apply the concepts behind these rules, then you'll be able to solve some complex orthotic problems when these things don't completely work out how you expect them to. So let's get into what these rules are. So first, during weight acceptance, it's a good idea to have a compressive heel cushion to help with shock absorption. All right, our heel is coming down, that's creating a lot of force, and we want a nice heel or a nice cushion to help with that shock absorption during that phase of gait. All right, during the single limb stance phase, I should wedge the patient until they have about 10 to 12 degrees of shank inclination during mid stance. So we've, harped on the shank to vertical angle, and so everybody should probably know by now I am going for 10 to 12 degrees of shank inclination during mid stance. If you don't completely understand why, then I would encourage you to go back and reference the Elaine Owen article, because that talks you through the whole concept of shank to vertical angle, and then also go back to your normal gait module. All right, and then remember, whenever we are adding a wedge on one side, we want to lift the other side. Otherwise, our patients are going to be tilted and your clinical instructors will be sad. And the point of this heel wedge is to help us have a more successful second rocker that's going to help improve our efficiency of gait. So I can recommend a rocker bottom shoe, so that way my patient can have a simulated third rocker. Again, improve the efficiency of gait. If you reference your Lusardi text, the 4th edition, you can read on page 227 progression through the stance phase, and you can also read about this kind of footwear on page 172 and 173. And so then, if we're trying to optimize our fourth rocker, a stiff toe plate will be in the way. I can either ask the orthotist to shave down the toe plate if it's appropriate, if I don't have significant spasticity or something like that that would contraindicate that. Or a rocker bottom shoe can also help simulate this fourth rocker. So if you guys just have these things memorized, then you are going to do pretty well with normalizing most gait. But we're going to talk now about some of the whys behind this. That way you can apply some of these concepts with more confidence on your complex orthotic decision making. Okay, so we will start by taking a look at our rocker function. We'll again review how they function normally, and then we'll talk about the effect of fixing the ankle on our rocker systems. So when we're looking at the whole rocker systems here, you remember our first and our second rocker act as deceleration rockers. So we are falling through space, and our first rocker ends up contributing to shock absorption as the ankle hits the ground. And the second rocker, that's when the plantar flexors come on and start slowing that acceleration of the tibia. So those help with shock absorption and controlling all of the kinetic energy from our foot landing on the ground with all of our body weight on it and helping direct it into the X plane so that way we can progress forward. Then our third and our fourth rockers are acceleration rockers. So this is where we start to progress over our foot. We have our thigh and our body segment has now moved ahead of the foot and is helping to propel us forward. We have all that momentum of our body and our thigh moving in the forward direction, and it's progressing over that fixed lever of our foot. All right, so that is a kind of zoom out on the rockers, and now we're going to zoom into all the rockers specifically. So looking at our first rocker, like I said, it is a deceleration rocker, and as our heel contacts with the ground, our foot begins to plantar flex, and our anterior tib is helping to control the rate of that plantar flexion, which is helping us with shock absorption. Additionally, that anterior tib is firing to help pull the tibia forward, which is helping with limb progression. So then let's think about what effect fixing the ankle in a neutral position would have on our heel rocker. So we'll still be able to contact the ground normally during initial contact. We have our ankle in a neutral position, and assuming that our AFO is in neutral, then we'll still contact the ground normally. But then we're not able to plantar flex at the ankle, which is going to affect our shock absorption. So instead of our foot nicely descending to the ground and then using that muscle action to pull our tibia forward in a nice controlled fashion, we are quickly hitting the ground and immediately just rolling to a flat foot position. All right, we've lost the ability to be able to decelerate that rocker. So we still have a lot of force and a lot of momentum at this point. It's just very poorly controlled. So that's why adding a compressive heel cushion can be a good idea for improving our first rocker, or at least minimizing the negative effects that bracing in a neutral position would have on our first rocker. It helps us to be able to decelerate that limb, so that way we can have better control as we are progressing forward in our gait cycle. Okay, so now we are looking at ankle rocker. So this starts during loading response when our foot is flat, and it progresses through into mid stance as our tibia is progressing over our ankle. And so our tibia progresses over our ankle in normal gait by moving from a position of plantar flexion during loading response to a position of dorsiflexion during mid stance. And all of this is being controlled, and the tibia is being decelerated as it moves forward by the action of the ankle plantar flexors. As the tibia is slowing, what's important is that our thigh segment continues to accelerate. And once the tibia reaches that 10 to 12 degrees of tibial incline, our thigh segment is able to pass over the tibia, and that helps us maintain forward motion. But then what happens when we fix the ankle into a neutral position? What's really important here is that at the ankle, we're not able to get the dorsiflexion to start moving the tibia into that 10 to 12 degrees of incline. And so our thigh segment is not able to pass over the tibia without creating hyperextension at the knee. And so in this way, we effectively lose our second rocker by bracing the ankle in neutral. Okay, so the mechanism for losing our forefoot rocker ends up working pretty similarly to our ankle rocker. So during forefoot rocker, again, our tibia is continuing to progress into more of an inclined position, and during normal gait, it does that by gaining more dorsiflexion at the ankle. Right, the plantar flexors are still working really, really hard to restrain the tibia, and that's giving our thigh segment a chance to continue to accelerate over our foot segment. All right? As the thigh segment accelerates over the foot segment, our body weight passes over our metatarsal heads, and that causes us to rock over those metatarsal heads, and that's what creates an acceleration rocker. We have the force of our body weight moving forward, and then we're rocking over these metatarsal heads, and that allows us to really efficiently continue to generate forward momentum. So then, when we brace this ankle in neutral, we never really reach this position, as we are not gaining the dorsiflexion that we need to move to that inclined shank angle. And so we start hyperextending at the knee, and we never get our center of pressure forward enough to roll over our metatarsal heads and start that acceleration phase of that third rocker. And so that's the way that we lose our forefoot rocker when we end up deciding to brace in a neutral position. So one other thing that prevents us from having a normal forefoot rocker is the stiffness of our foot plate in the AFO. And so usually during normal gait, like I said, we're able to rock over our metatarsal heads. But with an AFO that has a stiff foot plate, which we might have done on purpose to maximize our stability during stance, we're not going to be able to rock over that foot plate. So what can we do to help normalize our second and our third rockers of gait? So the first thing that we can do is we can add a heel wedge to our AFO side to promote more of an inclined tibial angle, or an inclined shank angle, to where we have that 10 to 12 degrees of tibial incline during mid-stance. That's going to be the optimum amount of incline to allow the thigh and the head, arm, and trunk to progress over our foot during mid-stance. So that allows us to maintain some of the momentum of our body segment moving forward, and so we preserve that forward momentum. So the other thing that we can do to help with our third rocker is we can recommend a rocker bottom shoe. So that has a bit of a bump on the bottom that allows the person to kind of have a simulated rollover, almost like they would be rolling over their metatarsals. And so that helps create that acceleration that we're missing by not having a normal third rocker. Finally, our fourth rocker, our toe rocker, is restrained in a similar kind of way as what we just touched on with the third rocker. So if we have too stiff of a foot plate, then we won't be able to get that 60 degrees of metatarsophalangeal extension that is necessary for our fourth rocker. So we're progressing from rocking over our metatarsal heads to now rocking over our metatarsophalangeal joints. And with a stiff foot plate, it won't allow us the ability to get that metatarsophalangeal extension, and so we won't be able to roll over our toes. So you may be able to ask an orthotist to shave down or thin out the foot plate. You'll want to be careful with this. If the person has like a significant amount of spasticity, then you might not want them to get all of that toe extension. You might be setting off something that's going to create some other issues in their gait, potentially some skin breakdown if you are setting off their spasticity. So just something to be careful about there. The other thing that works fairly well is, again, the rocker bottom shoe for continuing to gain that momentum progressing forward. Okay, so now we've gotten an appreciation for how restricting range of motion at the ankle affects our rocker system and diminishes the efficiency of our gait, as well as some things that we can do to help improve the efficiency of our gait. So now we are going to look at how bracing the ankle in a neutral position ends up affecting the ground reaction force vector relative to our knee joint compared with normal gait. And the nice thing is that if you have a good understanding of what I just talked about in terms of the rockers, you're going to be a good bit of the way there. Because again, the difference is, where is our ankle relative to where it is supposed to be during normal gait? And also the interventions that we do are the same based on the functional phase of gait. So we'll start by looking at weight acceptance. And so during initial contact, the ankle is usually in a neutral position, and we're bracing it in a neutral position. And so we have a normal initial contact. So we have a passive extensor moment at the knee, and everything is hunky-dory there. So now we move into loading response. So usually during loading response, we are progressing forward through our first rocker. Our momentum is moving forward, and we see that manifests with the knee coming anterior to the ground reaction force vector. So that's going to create a flexion moment, which we understand our quads come on pretty strongly. But the strength of that flexion moment is diminished somewhat by plantar flexion of the ankle. And that, compared to our ankle being at neutral, moves that ground reaction force vector closer to the knee. All right, so then when we brace the ankle, when we have it in neutral, that shifts our tibia into more of a vertical position rather than a reclined position. That's going to cause our ground reaction force vector to move more posterior to the knee and create a greater flexion moment than we would see during normal gait. The lever arm will be larger, and that creates more demand at the quads. So then if you couple that with the fact that we have lost the deceleration from our first rocker, because we no longer have that controlled plantar flexion guiding us down to the ground gently, that means we have greater force bringing us down towards the ground. So that creates an even greater torque demand on the quadriceps. So that makes it pretty important to add some kind of cushion, so that way that force is distributed out over a greater amount of time, and the amount of instantaneous demand on the quadriceps is diminished. So during our single limb stance phase of gait, we keep on thinking about how plantar flexed or dorsiflexed is our ankle relative to where it usually is within the gait cycle, and then what kind of effect does this have on the ground reaction force vector at our knee. Keep in mind that some of these effects might be kind of on purpose, because we may be trying to promote stability at the knee, and so we choose to fix the ankle in a locked position. But we can still tweak to try and optimize parts of our gait cycle, such as the shank to vertical angle, so that way we're giving up as little as possible in terms of efficiency while also promoting that stability that we want. So during mid-stance, the first time where we start really seeing an issue is when we're in that back half of mid-stance and we need the 5 degrees of dorsiflexion to be able to get into the proper position to promote our 10 to 12 degrees of shank inclination. Our neutral ankle doesn't allow us to do that. Our neutral ankle is relatively plantar flexed compared with the 5 degrees of dorsiflexion that we would need. This causes our ground reaction force vector to be more anterior relative to the knee joint than it would usually be at this phase in the gait cycle. So that creates more of a knee extension moment, which again might be something that we kind of want if we're trying to promote stability during single limb stance. If we feel that we're sacrificing too much gait efficiency for that stability, which we might make that decision if we're seeing a lot of knee hyperextension, then we can choose to wedge our patient to move their shank into more of an optimal 10 to 12 degrees of incline. That promotes more of a flexion moment at the knee. And so you might have to tweak this a little bit to get your optimal interplay between enough stability to be safe and enough mobility to be efficient. During terminal stance, again, we see a similar thing. We need even more dorsiflexion, but we're stuck in neutral. And so that creates a significant extension moment relative to where we would usually be in terminal stance. So if we're not wedged at that point to move our tibia more anterior, then we are likely to see knee hyperextension. So again here, our wedging is what really helps manipulate that ground reaction force vector at the knee. And we're just looking for that kind of sweet spot between having enough stability to overcome any weakness that they have and having enough mobility so that way their gait is still efficient. So then finally at pre-swing, it's really just a continuation of what we were talking about. And so the ankle is braced in neutral, and so they're unable to progress their body weight, their thigh, head, arm, and trunk over their metatarsals. They're not able to come over that toe break. And so our body segment never gets far enough forward to bring our ground reaction force vector posterior to our knee, as you see in the picture there. And so if we can set up a good terminal stance and then also implement some of our interventions to improve our third and fourth rocker, then we're more likely to see a more normalized pre-swing. And so that may include a rocker bottom shoe, and it may include shaving down the toe plate if appropriate. So that's it. Now you guys know enough to be dangerous when it comes to manipulating ground reaction force vectors at the knee by fixing the ankle in a particular position, and what interventions we can employ to optimize our gait efficiency while trying not to sacrifice too much in terms of the stability that we've created through our orthotic interventions. So post in the discussion board if you have any questions, and practice applying this information to some patient cases.